Like most of the cast, Kiske had his defense modifier value decrease, thus decreasing the damage that he takes. This was the damage that he took in the previous patch from this sequence, 106. This is the damage he takes in the current patch. 100 damage. Kai's 6P and 6 Heavy Slash have increased recovery. I'll put the previous version side by side with the current version, just so we can see the difference between them. The 6P nerf is pretty noticeable, and this should mean that Kai is just not going to be able to belligerently spam this normal in an attempt to punish your attempt at whiff punishing the first 6P he throws out. Now for 6 Heavy Slash. I think it's another noticeable nerf, although I think it's a little less so than the 6P nerf that we just saw. Still, this should mean that when Kiske tries to poke with these options, he's going to be a little more susceptible to either giving up his turn or being whiff punished. Kai's jumping S has an adjustment as well, where there's now a lower hitbox and hurt box. I'm not going to be able to really demonstrate this to the full effect because I don't have a hitbox viewer available, so y'all will have to find other resources, but maybe this little demonstration can give us an idea. This was the old interaction. As you can see, the 5P here from Asuka doesn't really catch Kai when he throws out this JS. And this is the JS with the new lower hitbox and hurtbox. It feels like when I set up this demonstration, it's a little easier for these high-reaching normals to actually interact with this startup of JS. Again, I'm not going to be able to fully demonstrate this so well, so you're going to have to look up things on like Dust Loop and see what the old hitbox and hurtboxes were and compare them to the new ones here. Shock State has had a buff this patch where pretty much every version of Stun Edge, including the Charge Stun Edge, has increased hit stop as well as block stun when it's used against an opponent who's put into Shock State. In the previous patch, there wasn't too much of a substantial difference. Kai was slightly plus in this situation here because of the range and recoveries going on. If we could do this up close, we can see he was fairly negative. And again, despite there being Shock State on the opponent and this Stun Edge coming through, the opponent was also still quite plus. Compare that to the current patch. There's quite a difference here between the amount of block stun that's going on, and once you get at farther ranges, Kiske is actually fairly plus enough to advance. So this means that Kiske gets rewarded for being able to successfully land on his zoning tools against the opponent in neutral, as well as also being able to reliably apply some extra Shock State duration after he gets like a knockdown using something like Dire Eclat. The difference is also quite noticeable when it comes to his Charge Stun Edge. So, this is the old version. That's the advantage before Shock State. That's the advantage after Shock State, again, in the old version. This difference is quite noticeable in the new patch, actually. So that's the advantage without Shock State. Then with Shock State, as you can see, Kiske's second jump is actually in time with the opponent's here, unlike in the previous version where the opponent was able to jump before Kai got a second jump off. The block stun is a little bit nice and means that maybe Kai can add a couple of other extra layers to his offense, but it also means that he's going to have to adjust his timing for some other things, like tick throws, for example. We'll see where things end up. In my experimentation using some PRC setups, I wasn't able to find anything that resembled like a true high-low mix-up that was good for both rewards, but maybe there's something I'm missing here. In line with these changes, his Dragon Install State also received buffs to all of the hit and block stun on these moves, which is very important for him because Dragon Install doesn't actually allow Kiske to leave the opponent in Shock State. So the versions of these moves all had to be buffed. As you can see, point blank, this Fireball was fairly negative. And he was about as plus as he was with a Shock State Fireball in the old version. In the new version, though, it's quite a dramatic difference. He's only slightly negative at point-blank range, meaning that at a farther range he's going to be more advantageous. However, with his Charge Stun Edge, he's able to get a third jump off before the opponent is actually able to move. And to break this down into some more practical terms, let's look at a few examples of potential mix-ups you can do off of this. Unlike other states for Kiske, he's actually able to get a true string low from this fireball in that particular sequence. This also means that if you're able to set this up, you can also do a back IAD and go for an overhead pickup here. Though, the ranges where you're able to convert off of that might be a little more finicky to work on out. Because of these changes, Kiske is actually able to loop combos or pressure sequences depending on the kind of setup that he gets. In this example here, you can see that once I run out of the ability to get ahead of the fireball and find this moment where the old fireball is dissipating so I can send out a new fireball, this pressure sequence pretty much ends here. But still, I think this is something that's pretty appropriate. What isn't appropriate, though, is going to be a bug that seems to exist with Kiske that I've already talked about in another video. But I'll go ahead and mention it here, just in case this sticks around. In the current release of the Season 4 patch, it seems like Kiske has some sort of bug that allows him to throw out more fireballs than he should be able to. I'm going to attempt to set it up right here. As you can see, because of the fact that there's this new hit stun and block stun here, if you're actually able to get these fireballs to come out earlier than they should be able to, you can get infinite combos from full screen. There's a couple of ways that you can try and set this up, though it is a little hard because you can't rely on a PRC or a Red Roman cancel to set this up, really. Well, maybe PRC, but you can't use Red Roman for sure, because you need a way to combo into this in the first place. But then once you get this going, it's fairly easy to maintain all the way through, and you could potentially either just fully chip out the opponent or even kill them if you're opening them up with a combo sequence, something like I showed with the blue RC a little bit earlier. And just to demonstrate that this certainly is a bug that's introduced in the current version of the game, I'm going to try and set something similar up to this in the old version. As you can see, in the old version of the game with the unimproved hit stop that the new version gave Dragon install, it's not possible for Kai to throw out multiple fireballs in this old version. He just can't do that one. Whereas in the new version, we saw that it was very much possible to get up like 3 fireballs on the screen at the same time. So this is something that I imagine is going to be patched out by Arc System Works at some point. They have yet to confirm any sort of bug acknowledgements or things like that they're working on in the patch, but odds are they're giving it some time to see what else gets discovered so that they can then go back and work on the game's coding. Kai's Foudre Arc has a nerf where the opponent will now fall faster after the ground bounce, thus making it harder for Kiske to pick up some combos. As you can see here, it's completely possible after that 6 heavy counter hit to use Foudre Arc to then ground bounce the opponent, and if you were in the right position, you would get longer combo sequences from a mid-screen position. This is what the new patch looks like. Pretty consistently, the opponent has already hit the ground and is in an OTG state, so Kai should no longer be able to pick up some counter hit confirms like this. This will affect a lot of his combo routes, generally for the worse, but Kai was a high damage character at pretty much any point on the screen, so this falls in line with Arc System's vision of trying to slow down the damage of the game overall. To offset these changes, they made it so that Kai has some more combo potential with his heavy vapor thrust against an opponent in shock state, thus making Kai more reliant on getting shock state in order to get some long damage combos here. So, in the old version of the game, if you used heavy vapor thrust in mid-screen, you didn't really get too much after it. The opponent got launched pretty far away. In the corner, this meant that you could use this heavy vapor thrust as a launcher and then extend the combo. Now, with the current patch, the blowback effectively sends the opponent straight up in the sky, meaning Kai's able to get these conversions even in mid-screen. So it's a nice way to retool Kai's overall damage routing around applying Shock State to the opponent first and then using this heavy DP as a combo launcher in the middle of it. To offset this, all versions of his heavy DP, so the ground and the air version, now will trigger the repeated move usage proration during Shock State earlier, just to make sure that if you're trying to spam these moves over, you are going to be heavily scaling your combo. A change I am not able to demonstrate at the moment is going to be to his slash vapor thrust, where now the start of the attack can no longer be canceled into an overdrive. This felt a little difficult for me to do, and I wasn't able to replicate it, but I wanted to mention this just in case it ever came up or somebody asked about it. It seems in line with the ability to making sure that there's no way for someone to use a fully invincible move and then go into a super that they could then make safe with an additional RC follow-up. That's my guess as to the change overall anyway. It falls in line with the nerfs that we saw in the previous patch towards any sort of invincible DP move where they lost the ability to be canceled. The last change to Kiske is to his Dire Eclat, which now has more horizontal blowback on counter hit. As you can see, it was possible to pick up potentially high damaging combo routes if you use this to frame trap the opponent's button mash. And this is what it looks like in the current version. This was about the range before that I had to run up and do the earliest possible 6 heavy slash that would connect and then launch the opponent before they were in the OTG state. It's still possible to get a OTG hit here. But by that point, it's just that, an OTG that's going to cause the opponent to immediately tech. Again, this falls in line with reducing Kai's overall damage in the mid-screen and making more reliant on applying Shock State, getting a hit, and then using his DPs to get combo launchers instead. Kiske is a little difficult to evaluate in this patch, solely for the fact that it's pretty clear that he has some sort of bug going on with his charge stun edge, and so when we look at him in Dragon Install state, which is a very powerful state, we don't know what actual tech that's being looked at is able to be used currently. Just because you saw how many fireballs I was able to put on the screen in this version, that shouldn't be the case. Getting infinites like that, even if they are probably unpractical to set up in a real match situation, especially considering what it takes to activate Dragon Install, the fact it still exists can definitely swing the outcome of a game, and we don't know what's intended and what isn't intended, and what could potentially be hotfixed by Arc System Works in the coming weeks, as they're probably taking some time to observe any bugs that slip through and trying to go back to the drawing board and address those in post-production. Still, Kiske did see mostly nerfs outside of the improved Shock State. So the fact he's got increased recovery on some of his best pokes is going to hurt his neutral overall. He lost some of his more easy combo extensions as well, which is going to significantly reduce his damage, much in line with the overall vision for this patch that Arc System Works stated they wanted to have. But he also has a little more interesting dynamics going on with Shock State. And once we know what we can actually explore and mess with the character, I think there's going to be a couple of new things for Kiske to play around with. And I kind of like the idea that applying Shock State to the opponent is something that Kiske is interested in doing in order to access his high damage, as it is pretty sick to see what he can do with his new Vapor Thrust combos in the mid-screen. Danny Elmaza has proven this character is in a pretty strong state, and with these changes, I think Kai is arguably slightly worse overall with a few new tools to play with, but should still be about the same character strength he was in the previous patch, which was still a pretty strong character.